Hello and welcome to the very first episode of the Sour Hour. My name is Cody Dennis. I'll be your host. Now, seeing as this is the first episode, there is going to be a bit of adjustment and growing pains, so to speak. So please bear with me as I get this whole thing figured out. What I really want this first podcast to convey is a starting point. I'm not, experienced in front of a microphone necessarily, aside from a couple of years of doing open mics at stand-ups and some, acting in high school, but this is a whole different ballgame. It's just me staring at an audio recording software in my room. And I feel like that's intimidating for a lot of people, and I assume a lot of people who are trying to get into a humor podcast that may themselves be really funny people are kind of intimidated, especially if they're doing one by themselves like I am, about the fact that they don't have that affect they do in day-to-day conversation where they make people laugh, because you don't have someone to spring ideas off of or be your straight man, so to speak. So I'm going to try to leave in as many ums and ahs and pauses as possible to show you that it's just a product of nervousness and, just a natural... This isn't a natural thing, being in front of a microphone and just talking to air. It's, I believe it's an acquired skill. So as I acquire this skill over time, maybe it can serve as an example to people who want to start their own podcasts, of what you can come from and still make a successful podcast. So this first episode is going to be about two stories that I find particularly embarrassing but also very funny about my youth. I'm 23. It's still my youth. This first story is a story of going from bad to worst. I was 18 years old. I was in Amsterdam, and it was the last leg of a month-long Europe trip with my best friend. Now, the thing about spending a month-long trip in Europe with your best friend in disgusting small hostels is that you don't have time by yourself at all. So what I had done is I had maybe gotten a chance to jerk off once. So I was in Amsterdam, and I decided, what the fuck? My friend was still in Italy at that point, so I go to a massage parlor, because I heard that in massage parlors they jerk you off afterwards. And when I get in there, of course, there was a beautiful woman at the front desk, and I ask, hey, can I get a massage? And she says 40 euros. And they do a bit of a Texas switch on me, because she tells me to go to the booth, the last booth on the left, and it's not the beautiful young receptionist that comes in, but this lady that looks like David Carradine in the Crank movies. So I'm like, whatever, beggars can't be choosers. I was a pretty self-loathing little fuck at that point, and I just wanted a hand job. So this lady starts massaging me. It's great, and by the end of it, I look like I have a tent on my lap, because again, I had jerked off once in an entire month, and I was 18. So it literally, someone could have been touching me with a pair of metal tongs, and I would have gotten an erection. So I try to point at my crotch and try to signal to her like I'm in the States or something that I want to get jerked off. And she says, okay, 40 more euros. And I had no more money in my wallet, and the nearest ATM was by the hostel about a half mile away. So I just pull my pants up and go back to the hostel. I think about going back to the massage parlor after I hit the ATM, but I decided against it because I was embarrassed as shit and I wanted to throw myself into the fucking canal. So instead, after I hit the ATM, I go to one of Amsterdam's famous coffee shops, smoke a couple joints, and then I bought a container of magic truffles, which are the same as psilocybin mushrooms you'll get in the States, but they're available for retail purchase and perfectly legal. At that point, the most drugs I'd ever done were just like a lot of weed in high school. So I had no experience with hallucinogenics. So I get like a medium batch, what they called it. and I scarfed them all down in one go and then topped that off with a beer because I was trying to force myself to have a good time because I was having a pretty shitty day and my friend wouldn't get into Amsterdam for a couple days. So I go back up to my room and I start looking at my phone. These were dormitory style rooms, so there was more than one person per room, but I was the only one in the room in Amsterdam in the middle of the day because you don't spend all day in your room if you're in Amsterdam, unless you're a loser like I was when I was 18. So I lay down on the top bunk and I start looking at my phone. And I'm like, this is fucking bullshit. Like, these don't even work. And then I notice that the icons of my apps on my phone are kind of starting to wiggle, starting to do like the transform tool in Photoshop thing. And then I am out. Like, my just perception gets all weird. I start seeing fractals in different shapes and all kinds of weird stuff. And I feel like I got a fart, but it doesn't quite feel like a fart, but I ignore it. And then I start freaking out and thinking that my soul was in the hostel, that my body had run away and drowned itself in the river. That's how fucked up I was, and that's how ill-prepared I was to take drugs. About an hour or so later, I came to, and everybody else was in the hostel at that point. I was covered in sweat. And this couple in the bed underneath me asked if I wanted to have a threesome. Or not a threesome, a foursome, because they wanted to go to the red light district, and they wanted to go, like, just 3 people in a hooker, which I didn't even know was a thing. I denied them because I felt, like, gross and sweaty, and I smelled bad because I had just gone through a hell nightmare trip. And I just spent the next 2 days in Amsterdam kind of taking it easy, just smoking weed, seeing sights, going to parks and stuff. And then when my friend had finally arrived at the hostel in Amsterdam, we had to change rooms just because of a logistical error, because we both wanted to be in the same room. I hadn't showered those 2 days. I'm not proud of it, but I was just, too busy having fun / being disgusting in Amsterdam to give a shit. So after that, I decided I was going to change and take a shower. When I went to go change, I took off my underwear and realized that I had shit my pants. And I was mortified. So I took my pants off immediately, threw them in the laundry. Or not the laundry, the trash can. And the second I'm doing that, this Eastern European housekeeper comes in and just looks at me like I'm a garbage person. And I felt like a fucking garbage person. And I'd say that was about the worst moment of my life up to that point. I just looked at the timer for the podcast in between takes and realized that this is going to be nowhere near an hour on my first attempt, but I feel like I want to be as honest as possible. And I did intend for this to be an hour when I first started and realized that I was kind of light on material. So I'm going to leave it at whatever it gets to, and in future attempts I'm going to try to pad it out and make it a little longer. And the reason I wanted to record this little aside was because I'm going to be posting this to a number of platforms, and I want just as honest, brutally honest if possible, but hopefully constructive criticism as possible, because I do want to improve. I do want to see the areas that I'm lacking and maybe the areas that I am doing right. Maybe there should be a different format. Maybe I should do a little bit more preparation ahead of time. I actually hadn't intended to do this as a topic at first. I was going to do something entirely different, but these are stories I've told 100 times probably to different friends at different bars, and it's just something that I could tell half asleep, so that's what I wanted to go with, and I just wanted to do this as a test run of sorts. So I hope you guys enjoy this. I'm going to be telling my second story, and then I'm going to be wrapping this up. Now, this last story is one I've told several times at bars, usually accompanied by my friend and co-host of my other podcast I'm working on, Lifestyles for the Drunk and Shameless. But I feel like my version is the most distilled, accurate account of events. So if we do ever get that podcast out and go into it, here is the God's honest truth version from what I've gathered from my multiple sources that told me the less big fish story side of the night during the times that I had kind of blacked out a little bit. So this was shortly after I lost my virginity. I was 18. A girl that I was seeing had decided I was kind of clingy and lost interest in me. So we go out to this party at Cal State Fullerton. My friends wanted to cheer me up, and there was a party going on. So we go out, we start drinking. I drank quite a bit, and eventually we get separated. I head to this party that I was one of the 3 white people at, probably, with one of my friends, and I kind of just sit there because the alcohol was hitting me, and my body was 140 pounds soaking wet at that point, probably, so I couldn't really handle my alcohol, especially keeping up with some of my friends. So I, to give you a frame of reference, went to go piss off the balcony like everybody else was doing, and I walked back into the party with my penis hanging out. So after that party gets shut down, we go to meet up with our friends and head home. I just leaned myself against some dorm door and start talking to this girl. This girl seemed nice. She seemed like she wanted to hang out with my group, and then this other girl sneaks up behind me and just barrages me with like over the top flirting. And at that time I didn't know how to deal with that, even if I was drunk and had a bunch of liquid confidence in me. And I really wasn't getting the message from this girl because I was pretty fucking smashed. So she eventually says, "We should go do something." And I'm like, "I mean, I'm kind of going home with my friends." And eventually my friends just say, no, we'll go do something, because my friends kind of caught on to it. So after that, I'm like, okay, we'll go do something. And this girl said, okay, but first we have to go find my room key. I think I left it in the bathroom. And, stupid, thumb in my ass me goes into the bathroom with this girl, and we start hooking up. And my friend at that point says that he had thrown a condom to me, and the way he tells it in his story, he throws it like a ninja star, and I caught it, and that didn't happen. The next day I checked my pockets, there was no condom or anything, just shame. But we'll get back to that later. We start fooling around and I can't get it up. I'm just too drunk. So eventually we just start making out, and her friend, this guy who I will remember to this day, probably till the day I die, comes in. He's wearing those Adidas Velcro sandals and socks, and he's like, "You guys shouldn't be hooking up," because I know he was one of those guys that just orbits around a girl and like is just waiting for her to be like drunk or vulnerable enough one day to hook up with her. So he eventually carries her out of the bathroom, and I remember this girl saying, "I want to fuck him." And it's the funniest thing to me, but as it turns out, maybe that guy was my guardian angel, because my friends told me after I sobered up the next day that girl was really gross. And they claim she weighed over 300 pounds, but I don't believe it. I do remember a vague notion of lifting her up onto the sink, and I had never lifted a weight in my life at that point. So it couldn't have been that bad. But at the time, when I was still drunk, I was very angry, and as I was walking to my car, I lit up a cigarette and almost burned my friend's face because I was swinging around, madly gesturing, and then the rest of the night's kind of lost on me. I ended up passing out on my friend's floor that night, and I woke up covered in piss. And my friend was really mad at me, so I blamed his dog. I told him that his dog had pissed on me when I was sleeping, and he didn't buy it, and I didn't expect him to buy it because that was a really fucking lame excuse. I'm sorry, bud. So that was the first episode of the Sour Hour, or in this case, the Sour 15 Minutes. Um, and as I've been trying to restate over the course of this 15 minutes, this isn't what I intend to be, what this podcast is going to be a month or two from now. I'm very much doing this to get criticism so I can improve and make a really good podcast one of these days. I hope you did enjoy the stories, though. They are some of my go-to stories when I'm out at a bar and people are telling their drinking stories or their drug stories. And I'm hoping that you gain some enjoyment out of my ums and my pauses. And I'm hoping that you do have some good criticism for me, because, this can be a very built by community podcast, a podcast that is great because of the fans, and not just like when someone says that, like it usually is, like just an empty statement of acknowledgement. It's actually going to be something that's built by fan criticism and like just tough love. Thank you very much. I've been Cody Dennis, and it's been very nice talking to you.